The first thing Damon Barlow noticed when he woke up in the research dome on EOS 7 was the smell something sharp and vaguely metallic, like burnt copper mixed with wet moss. He rolled off the cot, rubbing the bridge of his nose, and glanced at the environmental sensors blinking green. Oxygen normal. Temperature stable, radiation minimal. Still not Earth, he muttered, pulling on his boots. The dome's outer panel flashed with a steady blue light. Incoming visitor. He stepped into the main chamber where the airlock hissed open to reveal a tall, sinewy figure covered in mottled gray scales. Its 4 eyes blinked in sequence, and it carried a sealed canister cradled in both arms like it contained a newborn. "Dr. Barlow," it said, voice filtered through a translator clipped to a metallic band around its neck. "I am Arsk. I bring specimen as agreed." Damon waved him in. "You're early. I calculated your species' need for extended analysis time. You are slower. Appreciate the honesty." Arsk stepped inside and placed the canister on the stainless table with exaggerated care. Damon approached it cautiously. The outer shell was translucent, and inside was a swirling liquid the color of old bruises, purples, yellows, and blacks spiraling in slow motion. "This is the paralytic compound?" Damon asked. "Yes. Extracted from the Alvia root on the 6th moon of Diurn. Our species has used it for centuries in military trials, full paralysis within 6 seconds. Damon raised a brow. "You said this would be non-lethal." "It is, for us." "For you, I cannot guarantee." "Of course not." He leaned closer to inspect the fluid, trying not to flinch as it pulsed with iridescent sheen. Arsk stood silently, arms behind his back. "You said your people are struggling to control it," Damon asked. "Yes, we attempted dilution." "Only 3% deviation renders it inert, too much risk, too unstable." "And you want me to figure out how to make it safe for medical use," Damon said, "for both of us." Arsk inclined his head. "Yes, your species survives radiation, pathogens, even extreme trauma. You adapt." "We do not understand how." Damon tapped the canister with his knuckle. "Well, it's not magic. We die too, you know, just slower sometimes." The alien didn't respond. Later in the evening, Damon sat alone in the lab, a set of safety monitors blinking around the table. He wore a thick biosuit, uncomfortable but necessary, and had drawn a sample from the canister using a vacuum pipette. It sat sealed inside a triple-locked vial, hovering on a magnetic stirrer. The first test was simple: break it down. He applied heat, then cold. Nothing. He tried neutralizing agents, but the fluid reacted violently, producing small sparks and a choking white mist. He had to evacuate the lab twice before realizing that organic solvents only made it more volatile. By the end of the 5th day, he had recorded over 60 failed attempts at dilution. Each test ended the same way. Either the compound destabilized and turned into a toxic sludge, or it remained just as potent. On the 6th day, he tried something different. It was late, and his eyes stung from the recycled air. His hands trembled slightly from fatigue. He dropped a micromolar solution of saline into a new sample, then added a trace amount of a protein chain he'd extracted from his own blood days earlier. The reaction was instant but not violent. The compound shimmered, slowed, then settled into a uniform silver liquid. He stared, not daring to breathe. He injected the diluted substance into a lab-grown nerve cluster suspended in a gel tank. The nerves twitched, then relaxed. No paralysis, no degradation. Damon wiped his forehead. "That's promising." Arsk returned the next morning. Damon was already up, hunched over a microscope. "You look weary," Arsk said. "I've been up all night, but I think I got it." "You solved the instability." "I think so. Your compound resists dilution because it relies on a very specific protein structure to maintain its paralytic effect. When I introduced a competing protein, one that binds more efficiently, the effect was neutralized without destroying the base compound." Arsk stared at him. "You used your own biology." "Only a fragment. I replicated it. No need to panic. This is unexpected. I figured it might be. But now it's stable, and I think we can use it." Arsk moved to the tank and observed the nerve cluster. There is no paralysis, not with the current concentration, but here's the kicker: we can now adjust the dose. It doesn't destabilize anymore. You made it safe. I made it manageable. Arsk tapped his translator. We must test it on live tissue. That's the next step, but not a full organism. Not yet. 3 days later, under tight containment protocols, Damon and Arsk performed the first test on a small mammalian subject, one grown in the lab using hybrid DNA. The diluted compound was administered in precise increments. The subject experienced muscle relaxation, then full mobility within 6 minutes. No signs of toxicity, no paralysis. Damon grinned. It's working. Arsk said nothing for a while. Then, you have done what our entire research council failed to achieve. Maybe you just needed a fresh set of eyes. Or perhaps your species is simply reckless enough to try what we would not, Damon chuckled. That's not wrong. The next phase involved testing on Ark's species. A volunteer arrived thin, with pale skin and a visible tremor in his limbs. I suffer from degenerative nerve disorder, the alien explained. I volunteered for this test willingly. Damon reviewed the data. You understand this is still experimental. I do. But our options are limited. The injection was slow. Damon monitored every parameter, sweat beading under his collar. For 2 minutes, nothing happened. Then the tremor slowed. The alien relaxed in the chair. His breathing steadied. I feel still, the volunteer said. Ark's gaze was fixed on the monitor. No paralysis? No, only calm. Damon leaned back. His chest ached with relief, but the real test came 2 weeks later. The medical council of Ark's people invited Damon to present his findings. He was flown to the Capitol Dome aboard a humming transport that rattled in the upper atmosphere like a tin can. He arrived with a black case in hand, inside which were 6 vials of the stabilized compound. The council chamber was vast, with tiered seating and a central platform. Arsk stood beside him, unreadable as always. Damon stepped forward and began. I'm not here to tell you your compound is bad. It's not. It's powerful. Too powerful, maybe, but that's why it matters. With the right modifications, it's more than a weapon. It's a tool. He explained the protein binding process, the dilution ratios, the testing phases. One of the council members interrupted. If this is so stable, why has no other species succeeded in refining it? I don't know, Damon said. Maybe because they didn't want to inject themselves with something they barely understood. There was a pause. Then quiet murmurs. Another counselor leaned forward. You mean you tested this on yourself? Only a small dose, and only after I was sure it wouldn't bind to my motor neurons. But yes. There was a stunned silence. You're mad, one of them said. Maybe, but it worked. After the presentation, Damon was taken aside by a young medical technician. She handed him a data slate. This is a list of patients, all with neurodegenerative conditions. They're asking to be part of the expanded trial. Damon looked down at the list, over 200 names. He exhaled slowly. We'll need a bigger lab. Arsk approached later that night. Your kind's resilience is disorienting, Damon snorted. We're not that special. We just don't know when to quit. I believe that may be your defining trait. Damon stared at the stars through the dome's translucent ceiling. You know, back home, I was just a field biochemist, barely made tenure. Here, you are something else. Yeah. A guy who diluted an alien poison into a nerve relaxant. Arsk paused. You saved lives. Damon didn't answer right away. He just sat there, hands folded, thinking of the lab, the nerve cluster, the terrified volunteer who'd smiled when the tremor stopped. I guess I did. And for once, he let that be enough. The examination suite on the upper level of the IO's 7 medical facility was colder than Damon preferred. Not frigid, but enough to make his knuckles stiff as he adjusted the scanner over the volunteer's clavicle. The floor-to-ceiling pane of synth glass separated him from the observation area, where 6 of Ark's colleagues sat at varying heights, their postures rigid and unreadable. He leaned in toward the scanner's display. Muscle conductivity stable. No sign of residual inhibition. The volunteer, a stooped figure with a crest of pale growths along his scalp, blinked slowly. I can lift both arms now without tremors. Let's try the grip test again. The subject wrapped his fingers around the pressure rod. It twitched once, then steadied. The digital readout climbed in smooth increments. Damon nodded, glancing at a side console where vitals pulsed in soft blue waves. Above baseline, that's new. Arsk stood behind him, arms folded. We have not seen this level of response in any therapy. You've probably never had access to a compound that could suppress synaptic misfires without locking the entire neuromuscular junction. Your methods remain unsettling. I'm not asking you to like them. I'm asking you to look at the data. The volunteer released the rod and flexed his fingers, watching his own hands like they belonged to someone else. Damon handed him a small sphere of dense foam. Try squeezing this. Slowly, the alien complied, then turned the ball over in his palm, examining the indentations left by his grip. I haven't held anything without dropping it in over 100 cycles. Damon glanced at Arsk. You'll want to start thinking about long-term dosage control. If this effect holds, we're moving beyond symptomatic relief. Arsk's throat sac shifted slightly. You refer to neuroplastic adaptation. Exactly. If we keep the compound in sub-inhibitory concentrations, the brain might start repatterning around the stabilized state. But that is not guaranteed. Welcome to medicine. Arsk tilted his head toward the observation deck. They request public trials. That's a terrible idea. They will insist, Damon exhaled, wiping the scanner lens with a cloth. Then we need protocols. You've seen what happens when the compound destabilizes. Arsk's lower eyelids contracted. I have not forgotten. Later that cycle, they convened in the central amphitheater, an oblong hall lined with vertical light veins and tiered seating that wrapped around a central speaking platform. Damon stood in the middle with a projection slate hovering beside him, displaying real-time molecular animations of the stabilized fluid. One of the senior evaluators, a broad-shouldered being with opalescent ridges along his arms, leaned forward. You injected this into yourself. I isolated the critical protein, replicated it in a bioreactor, verified compatibility, then tested with a microdose. Yes, you understand that is considered reckless. I understand it was necessary. You invited me here to succeed where your own protocols failed. A second evaluator, smaller and with translucent skin that revealed a lattice of green veins, gestured toward the projection. Your dilution method, will it hold under atmospheric variability? It already did, Damon replied. We tested under pressure fluctuations, temperature shifts, even partial dehydration. The compound remained chemically stable. There was a pause. Then, unexpectedly, a third evaluator spoke, one who hadn't uttered a word across any prior session. If we accept your findings, what's the next phase? Targeted trials, controlled dosing, and a partnership. You've got the infrastructure, I've got the formula. And what incentive do you offer? Mobility? Independence. A future where your people aren't locked into paralysis by a substance you created but couldn't master. The room fell quiet. Then, a low chime signaled the end of the session. Back in the lab that evening, Damon sat at his workstation, rotating a 3D model of the compound's molecular lattice. He barely registered the quiet footsteps approaching. You did not present the metabolic variance data, Arsk said. I didn't need to. It was relevant. They weren't ready for it. Arsk rested a hand against the edge of the console. You navigate our hierarchy with odd intuition. You mean I know when to shut up? The alien paused. Yes, Damon tapped the edge of the monitor. You ever wonder what this compound was originally designed for? Before the paralysis, our records stated evolved as a defense mechanism in plant life. Sure, but you don't engineer a molecule this complex without intent. Arsk didn't answer. 2 rotations later, Damon was summoned to the infirmary wing. A technician with a marbled carapace met him at the entrance, antennae twitching erratically. A patient has self-administered the stabilized compound, unauthorized. Damon's stomach tightened. When? Less than a segment ago. He's coherent, but his vitals are unstable. Inside, a young alien lay prone on a diagnostic platform, limbs twitching in shallow bursts. Damon approached, scanning the readout. Dosage. Triple the tested amount, the technician said. Idiot. The patient blinked slowly. I wanted to walk again. You could have died. I still might. Damon opened a drawer and pulled out a neutralizing agent he'd developed as a contingency. He injected it near the base of the subject's neck. Within seconds, the spasm slowed. He needs observation, Damon said. And a psych consult, the technician nodded. Your formula will be blamed. Let them blame me. But tell them this: he overdosed on a drug meant to help him, not because it was flawed, because he was desperate. That night, Damon returned to the lab and sat in silence for a long time. The compound, still suspended in its containment field, shimmered with deceptive calm. Arsk arrived near dawn. The council has issued preliminary approval. Clinical trials may proceed under your supervision. Damon didn't look up. We had our first misuse case. I heard he might recover. Might not. This is the risk of progress. Damon scratched his chin. You ever think we're moving too fast? All advancement appears too fast to those who remember the starting point. Damon finally turned to face him. That's a poetic way of saying deal with it. Arsk inclined his head. I have studied your kind more closely since your arrival. You are a species driven by discomfort. That's one way to put it. You fear stasis more than failure. Damon folded his arms, considering. Maybe. We don't like being told something can't be done, even when it should not be attempted, especially then. They stood in silence for a few seconds before Arsk gestured toward the console. The council recommends selecting 5 trial participants, diverse pathologies. Full documentation. Damon tapped the screen. Already started. I'm including a case with sensory nerve degeneration. If it works there, we're not just treating motor disorders anymore. You intend to restore sensation, if we're lucky. Arsk studied him. You are not like the others we have met. Because I'm reckless. Because you are curious beyond reason. Damon smiled faintly. Comes with the species. The door slid open behind them, and the first of the new volunteers stepped through, tall, with deeply sunken joints and a gait like stretched rubber. Damon straightened, pulling on his gloves. Let's see what this thing can really do. The third volunteer, a retired navigation systems technician named Revek, arrived just after second rest shift. Damon stood in the treatment chamber, adjusting the dosage parameters on the console, while Revek eased onto the diagnostic bed with a stiffness that made Damon wince. I lost full leg function 32 cycles ago, Revek said, voice flat, as if the statement had been worn smooth by repetition. No injury, just gradual loss, nerve atrophy with no clear onset. Damon nodded once and slid the injector tray into position. You'll feel a slight pressure in the lower spine. We're targeting the lumbosacral plexus with the modified compound. You'll be conscious the entire time. Revek folded his arms across his chest and stared at the ceiling. I read your file. Which part? You once grafted a synthetic nerve segment into a Terran amphibian using your own stem cell scaffolding. That was a mistake. Why? I didn't check the immune compatibility. The frog exploded. Revek made a short clicking sound that Damon couldn't tell was amusement or concern. That's oddly reassuring. Damon prepped the injection site, careful to avoid the dorsal ridge. The scanner confirmed needle alignment and the compound slowly entered Revek's system. Now we wait, Damon said, stepping back. You'll feel warmth first, then tingling. If anything spikes pain, nausea, blurred vision, you tell me immediately. Revek's eyes narrowed. Is that expected? No, that's why it'd be a problem. They waited in silence. Damon monitored the nerve response through a live feed of conduction velocity and synaptic transmission. After 6 minutes, Revek's toes flexed. "Try lifting your left foot," Damon said. The movement was sluggish but unmistakable. Damon checked the graph. The motor signal had jumped from near 0 to 40% of predicted strength. "That's not placebo," Damon muttered. Revek stared down at his own foot like it had performed a magic trick. "That hasn't happened since the orbital relay collapse." Damon adjusted the dosage slightly, then activated the low-voltage stimulus pad beneath the patient's legs. "I'm going to challenge the nerves. Let's see if they're just waking up or actually talking to the brain again." This time, the response was quicker. Both legs shifted, then twitched in unison. Revek's breathing sped up. "You're serious?" "This is real. I didn't come here to perform parlor tricks." 4 hours later, Revek walked 20 steps unaided, leaning only slightly on the wall. The hallway outside the chamber had been cleared, and 2 of the attending neurotechnicians watched in stunned silence. Damon leaned against the frame, arms crossed. "You're going to be sore tomorrow. That's a good thing." Revek turned slowly. "I'd rather be sore than immobile." The following evening, the council's medical oversight committee arrived unannounced. Damon was in the middle of compiling the updated intake forms when the doors slid open, and 4 officials entered. Their facial ridges marked with bioluminescent status bands shifting in subtle gradients of green and violet. "You were not scheduled for evaluation until 4th rotation," one of them said. "You're welcome to look around," Damon replied, not lifting his gaze from the screen. "But if you want to understand what's happening, don't start with the charts. Start with Revek." The counselors exchanged glances. One of them peeled off toward the observation corridor. A moment later, her voice came through the intercom. "The subject is ambulatory." Damon finally looked up. "Not just ambulatory, coordinated. We're seeing full return of reflexive response. The compound's no longer just suppressing degradation, it's reversing it, at least partially." "You risk creating dependency," another counselor said. "I've already accounted for that. We're introducing staggered microdoses to map tolerance thresholds. If the compound outpaces neurogeneration, we reduce frequency. The point isn't to replace the nervous system, it's to give it a chance to recover. And if it doesn't, then we stop. But right now you've got patients walking who haven't stood in years." The counselors conferred in low tones. Damon turned back to his console, already pulling up the 4th volunteer's intake scan. "You're not here to be impressed," he said without facing them. "You're here because you finally believe this might work." An hour later, Arsk arrived, his gait more purposeful than usual. "You've made them nervous. I thought that was your job." They expected incremental progress, not functional restoration. Damon tapped the monitor. "I didn't either, not this soon, but the compound's behaving like a selective neuromodulator now. It's not just interrupting misfires, it's guiding repair." Arsk leaned closer to the simulation. The molecule's active sites pulsed in soft amber. "That is not what it was designed to do." "No, but that's what it's doing." The next trial took place 2 days later. The 5th and final participant, a former language archivist named Celia, suffered from sensory failure, pressure, temperature, proprioception all gone. Damon adjusted the compound's formulation, this time targeting afferent pathways rather than motor cores. "You may feel phantom sensations," he warned before the injection. "Your brain might interpret them as pain, heat, even incorrect limb positions. It's temporary." Celia nodded once. "I've felt nothing for so long. I'm prepared for discomfort." The injection took longer, 13 minutes in total, with multiple site applications along the cervical spine. Damon watched her closely, noting the micro-expressions in her jaw and fingers. Then she inhaled sharply. "There's something on my hand," she whispered. "There's nothing there," Damon said, "but your nerves think otherwise. Describe it. It's like wind, cold, moving." Damon activated the haptic panel beside her and ran a low-grade vibration across the surface. Her eyes widened. "I can feel that." The technicians behind the glass froze. One of them whispered something Damon couldn't hear. Celia lifted her arms slowly, eyes locked on her fingertips. I forgot the texture of air. Damon stepped back, hands on his hips. We're done here. 3 rotations later, all 5 volunteers walked into the council chamber unaided. No supports, no assistance. Rivek carried the weight of his own gait like a man unlearning gravity. Celia touched every surface she passed, as if reacquainting herself with the physical world. Damon stood aside, letting their presence speak louder than any data point. One of the counselors cleared his throat. We have reviewed the results across all subjects. The recovery exceeds our expectations. Damon offered no reply. Another counselor continued. We approve full synthesis and distribution under joint supervision. The compound will be renamed under a neutral designation. Call it whatever you want, Damon said. Just use it. Arsk approached as the volunteers exited, his posture unusually relaxed. You have altered our approach to medicine. Not medicine, Damon replied. Perspective. You were trying to control a weapon. I saw a broken tool that just needed a different grip. And now it's not broken anymore. Arsk tilted his head. You will return to your world soon, after we finalize the replication protocols. I've got enough tissue samples to train your people on the protein synthesis process. You could remain, lead the new department. Damon shook his head with a tired smile. I'm not a leader, I'm a fixer. You don't need me anymore. Arsk watched him for a moment, then extended his hand, not a gesture typical of his species. Damon took it. As he left the chamber, the hall filled with the quiet shuffle of footsteps, 5 of them, steady and sure, walking without fear or hesitation. He didn't look back. There was nothing left to fix.